Courtship of Harry Potter by Diana Williams. Chapter 10, Godfathers and Gifts. Somehow Harry wasn't surprised to receive an owl from Sirius the next day asking him to come to Hagrid's hut after classes. He sighed, wondering how he was going to explain the situation to his godfather, while at the same time hoping that Sirius would have some practical advice for him, like how to get out of this mess. Hagrid opened the door and beamed at him. "Harry, come on in, have a seat. I've tea ready for you, and I baked some cakes earlier." In a loud whisper, he said, "Got something to tend to outside, so I'll let you and Black have a little privacy." Harry nodded his thanks and hesitantly stepped closer to the fireplace. Sirius was up from his chair in a moment, folding his arms around him in a tight hug, and Harry clung to his godfather for a long moment. It felt so good to have Sirius there, and he was so ready to shift his burdens to someone else for a change. "Let me take a look at you," Sirius said, holding him out at arm's length. "God, Harry, you've grown so much. Look more like your father every day." "You look good too," Harry said. He knew from their infrequent meetings and letters that Sirius was staying with Remus Lupin whenever he wasn't running errands for Dumbledore, and it was apparent that his life agreed with him. He looked more like the man in his parents' wedding picture and less like the desperate escaped criminal every year. "How's Professor Lupin?" "Very well. Sends his love, and I'll tell him you were asking about him." He turned to the teapot, pouring them each a mug, and sat down in one of the chairs by the fireplace. "Well, Harry, this is a big year for you, isn't it?" Harry nodded. "I think I'll pass my newts with no problem. Hermione's making Ron and me study every night." Sirius nodded. "Not only that, but you've got a big decision to make about who to take as your Erastus." Harry spewed a mouthful of tea across the room. "What? You know about that?" Sirius gave him a puzzled look. "Why wouldn't I know about that? Been a tradition for centuries, hasn't it? I was Eromenus myself." "You were?" Harry gasped. "Of course. Most of the older wizarding families follow the practice. It's tradition, Harry." "My father?" "Well, no," Sirius admitted. "But then he had Lily, didn't he? Being muggle-born, she wouldn't have quite understood him making her wait 3 years to get married. And of course Remus couldn't, being a werewolf and all. But Peter did." His face darkened at the mention of his traitorous ex-friend. "He went to McNair in the Ministry." "That's probably how he met Voldemort," Harry said. "McNair's a Death Eater." Sirius looked at him in surprise, but then, after a moment's thought, nodded. "Wouldn't surprise me. Always thought the man liked his role of executioner too much." "What about you?" Harry asked curiously. A little smile curved Sirius's mouth. "Ah, well, mine was an aura. Not one you'd know. Helped me a lot with my training. Things that saved my life a couple times. Those were good years." "Then you didn't mind the sex?" Sirius gave him an amused look. "Harry, I lost my virginity at 15 and pretty much went after anything on legs. Giraffe was a good friend and a good teacher. I don't regret a moment I spent with him." "So what happened? If he was such a good friend, why didn't he try to help you when you were arrested?" Sirius sighed and sat back in his chair. "He was killed during a Death Eater raid 6 months before your parents died." "Oh." Harry didn't know what to say to that. "I'll miss him still," Sirius said quietly, then added briskly, "Enough about me. I'll take it that you've already learned something about the Erastus rights." Harry nodded. "Hermione got me a book." Sirius smiled fondly. "The Erastus rights, what every Eromenus should know," he said. "Great book. Nearly wore out my copy of it." Harry flushed, not sure that he wanted to picture his godfather poring over the sexually explicit drawings in the back. Yeah. He could feel Sirius's sharp eyes on him. "Harry, are you a virgin?" Harry nodded, too embarrassed to reply. "Nothing to be ashamed of, my boy. We'll just need to make sure we fix you up with the right sort of man, one who'll know how to take proper care of you." Harry frowned at that, not sure if he liked the idea of someone taking care of him. On the one hand, it would be nice to share some of his burdens with someone else. On the other hand, he'd been taking care of himself since he was a child, and he resented the idea of someone bossing him around. "I've already had 2 offers." Sirius brightened at that. "2 already? I knew you'd be a popular one, Harry. Who are they from?" Well, the first one is from Professor Spindly Worm, the defense against the dark arts teacher. Sirius frowned in thought. Well, the Worm family's good enough. Goes back to the Conqueror and all that. Don't think much of this hyphenated name business, though. Word is that his grandmother, that'd be Lucinda Spindly, had the old man wrapped so tight that the man couldn't sneeze without her permission. What's the man like? Harry shrugged a little. He's a pretty decent teacher, went to Beauxbaton. That's not what it meant, Harry. Oh. Well, I suppose he's good looking, and he seems pretty nice, Harry said vaguely, then added, he knows a lot about Quidditch. We had a nice talk the other night. Alone? Sirius asked sharply. No, Professor McGonagall chaperoned us. Good, Sirius said. I'll have to check around, see what I can find out about this fella. In the meantime, make sure he follows the rules. No patty fingers or snogging until we see what kind of compensation he's prepared to come across with. Harry flushed a little, and Sirius said, or with a growl, You haven't been letting him touch you, have you? Not exactly, Harry said quickly. He kissed my hand, that's all. And Professor McGonagall scolded him for that. All right, then. Harry decided not to tell Sirius about kissing Snape on the cheek. In fact, he hoped that his godfather would forget all about the other sinner. Unfortunately for him, Sirius didn't. Who's the second suitor? Sirius asked. Harry mumbled, and Sirius frowned. Speak up, Harry, I couldn't understand a word you said. Harry said, Professor Snape. What? Sirius surged out of his chair, his face livid and his hands clenched. How dare that greasy bastard lay a hand on you? Sirius, he hasn't, Harry pointed out. He's courting me, just like Max. Max? Sirius said suspiciously. Who the bloody hell is Max? I thought you said you had 2 of us, not 3. Professor Spindly Worm, Harry said, rolling his eyes. That's his first name. And who said that you could call him by his first name? He did, Harry said promptly. In fact, they both said I could call them by their first names. I'd like to know where Snape gets off thinking he has the right to court you, much less ask you to call him by name. Sirius snapped. He meets all the qualifications, Harry said. He knows me, he requested permission properly, and he was a perfect gentleman during our private meeting. The headmaster was our chaperone. Harry decided not to mention that Dumbledore had been out of the room for at least 15 minutes. Hermione says that the Snapes are one of the oldest wizarding families in Britain. He's a dark wizard and a Death Eater. He was a Death Eater, Harry said patiently. Then he spied for Dumbledore, and he was almost killed 2 years ago when you know who came back. He can't even leave Hogwarts now because of that. Sirius frowned at him. Harry, it sounds like you like him. Harry shrugged. I don't know about that. I mean, he isn't very nice, and he certainly isn't fair. But he's very smart, and I think he's a good person. He hesitated. Sirius, did you know that he was good friends with my mom? Sirius sighed. Couldn't help but know that. She was Ravenclaw, and they had several classes with Slytherin. Lily and Snape were almost always class partners. Even after she and James started dating in 5th year, she studied with Snape nearly every night. She always took his side and wouldn't speak to me for a month after... Tactfully, Harry ignored the reference to the Shrieking Shack incident. He gave me a postcard she sent him from Corfu. Sirius smiled a little wistfully. That was the summer after our 6th year, he recalled. I remember the letter she sent James, and the pictures. Harry felt a little pang of sadness for Snape. If that was the 6th year summer, then he probably didn't get to see Egypt with Lily after all. By the following summer, he was contracted to Voldemort. Sirius, you're not going to forbid me to see him, are you? He asked. Can't, Sirius said with his eye. Doesn't mean I have to like it, though. And I want to remind you that just because these two are courting you, doesn't mean you have to accept them. I expect you could do much better if you wait till summer when you'll have a wider choice of suitors. That's what I'm afraid of, Harry said with a sigh. A lot of people after me because of what I am, the boy who lived, and not who I am. Harry, it's not like we're talking about the love of your life, Sirius said, a bit taken aback by the sadness in Harry's voice. Harry snorted. Right. It's not like I'd be allowed to fall in love with whoever I choose, is it? Sirius blinked at Harry and then said carefully, Is there anything you'd like to tell me, Harry? Harry gave him an uncertain look, then sighed. No, I'm pretty sure that I like boys better than girls. British, yeah. From what I gather, you haven't tried either so far. So how can you know? Because looking at guys makes me hot, and looking at girls doesn't, Harry said sarcastically. Harry, it's not the end of the world, Sirius said, reaching out to hug the young man. There's not as many wizards who prefer other blokes, but there are some, not to mention muggles. You're young, and I'm sure you'll find someone, so just think about this whole Erotstas thing as practice. Harry buried his face in Sirius's shirt and said, I don't suppose there's a chance I could just forget the whole thing, is there? Not much, Sirius said reluctantly, but you know you all. But if you want to do that, I'll find a way. I promise. On the following Saturday morning, gifts started arriving. Malfoy's gifts, at any rate. Seamus kept them informed of the items, as well as a running total, much to Ron's disgust, and the amusement of the rest of the Gryffindors, except for Harry. He was too busy trying not to think about what gifts his own suitors would send. It was during lunchtime that Harry caught sight of an owl making its way towards the Gryffindor table, an oddly familiar-looking bundle clutched in its talons. He'd seen one like that when he was a first year, as a matter of fact. The owl released the package above him, and Harry caught it, then set it down on the table. Who's it from? Seamus asked, his eyes scanning along the length of the wrapped broom. Ron snorted, as if Snape would send Harry a broom. Harry found the attached card and read, It's from Professor Max. I told you, we talked about Quidditch and brooms and stuff, remember? He says that he has a friend who works with one of the manufacturers and that he thought I'd enjoy this. Well, aren't you going to open it? Dean asked impatiently. Harry grinned and tucked the card in his pocket, then tore open the wrappings. Dead silence fell over their end of the table as everyone stared at the broom lying there. I've never seen anything like it! Ron breathed, his eyes running over the broom from the tip of its handle to the sleekly shaped bristles. I have, Seamus said reverently. One of the players on the Ireland team has a custom job. Looks just like this. Well, except for that. That was the place where the logo would normally be. Instead, there was a lightning bolt design bracketed by an H and a P. Whoa, Ron said, taking in the full effect. If I'd known the professor had friends like that, I'd have asked him to court me. That made everyone laugh, breaking up the odd tension. Harry, are you going to try it out? Neville asked. Now that's a bloody brilliant idea, Ron said. The pit should be empty right now. Hurry! Harry could hardly take his eyes off the broom, and suddenly he wanted to try it out more than anything else. He looked up at Ron, grinning. Let's do it. The group of Gryffindors headed for the doors, laughing and talking excitedly, leaving behind the wrappings and Hermione. She had been silent during the uproar over the professor's gift, and there was a thoughtful frown on her face as she watched them leave. Miss Granger. Startled, Hermione looked up to see Professor Snape standing beside the table, looking irritated as if he'd had to repeat her name more than once. Or maybe he was just in his usual foul mood. Professor Snape! Sorry, I was thinking. How unusual, Snape said dryly. Hermione noticed that the potions master was holding a box in his hands, and she had a sudden horrible feeling at the pit of her stomach. Are you looking for Harry? He just left. Her voice trailed off, not wanting to tell Snape that Harry had just hurried off clutching his rival's gift. Snape raised an eyebrow at her, and she blushed as she realized he must have seen the whole scene. I am well aware of that. If it would not be too much trouble, would you give this to Mr. Potter when he returns? Hermione carefully took the box and looked down at it curiously. It appeared to be full of letters, dozens of them, and she suddenly realized what they must be. She looked up at Snape in surprise, oddly touched by the gesture. Sir, I'm sure Harry will love this, she said warmly. It's very kind of you. Snape sneered at her. Really, Miss Granger, there is no need to apply such disgusting sentiments. They were merely lying around my chambers. I am relieved to be rid of the clutter. Hermione bit her lip to keep from grinning. Each letter appeared to be perfectly preserved and dust-free, which meant someone had taken a great deal of care with them. "Of course, Professor," she said stoically. "I'll make sure Harry gets them when he returns." Snape nodded and strode off toward the head table, his robes swirling behind him. Hermione watched him speculatively for a few minutes, then took the precious box up to the safety of her room. Harry entered the Gryffindor common room, grateful for the warmth of the fire. He'd spent the better part of 3 hours on the pitch testing out his new broom and letting his friends try it as well. He grinned as he recalled the incandescent look on Ron's face when he offered him the first go on it, and his friend had been nearly speechless when he reluctantly landed to pass it on to the next person. Seamus and Dean had been equally thrilled, and although Neville had declined a ride, he clearly enjoyed watching his friends swooping around. Madame Hooch had joined them at the end as she was getting ready to oversee the Ravenclaw Quidditch practice, and she'd praised the broom highly as well. "It was really splendid of Professor Max, to go to all that trouble for him," he thought. Harry had only a vague idea of what such a thing must cost, based on the price of his 2 previous brooms. But Seamus had explained that it wasn't just the cost. Getting a broom manufacturer to custom build a broom was nigh on impossible unless you were a big-name Quidditch player who'd get them plenty of free press. He supposed, with the cynicism he'd slowly developed during the past 6 years, that they'd make some of that up by advertising how they'd supplied the boy who lived with a custom broom, but it was still a nice gesture. "How was it?" Harry turned around to see Hermione curled up in one of the chairs by the fireplace with a box on her lap. He grinned at her. "It was brilliant! I've never flown so fast, and the way it maneuvers! I swear it was like it was reading my mind." "Sounds wonderful," Hermione said. "Didn't the others come back with you?" "They were frozen solid, so they went to the hall to see if they could get one of the house elves to fetch some cocoa." He gestured towards the box on her lap. "What's that? Another button campaign?" She held the box out to him. "Professor Snape brought this by for you." Remembering his other suitor now, Harry was curious about what Snape had chosen as a gift for him. Harry carefully leaned his broom against the wall and took the box from Hermione. It was an open box, about as big as a double shoebox, and it appeared to be full of envelopes. He sat down on the floor, the box in his lap, and pulled out the first one. There was a subtle feeling of magic bound into the parchment, and he had a sudden premonition about what he was about to see. With slightly shaking fingers, he unfolded the letter and recognized the flowing script he'd seen on the postcard. The heading of "Dear Sev," and the signature confirmed that the correspondence was, indeed, from his mother to Snape. Carefully, he tucked the letter back into the envelope to be read later in private, and saw that the outside of each envelope had a date neatly written on it in Snape's distinctive handwriting. Closer inspection confirmed that the dates had been recently added, and, as he estimated, there were close to 50 letters. The thought of how much time it had taken to sort and label each overwhelmed him. "They're from your mother, aren't they?" Hermione asked quietly. Harry nodded, biting his lip at the sudden rush of emotion. "He must have really liked her, to go to the trouble of preserving them and keeping them for so long." "He told me he loved her. Not in a romantic way, but as a best friend," Harry said quietly, his fingers ruffling through the envelopes. He got a glimpse of something in the bottom of the box and frowned. "Hang on, there's something else in here." Carefully, he set the letters on the floor beside him and stared dumbfounded at what he'd found. It was obviously a wizarding photo from his parents' wedding, this one of his mother with her family. He recognized Aunt Petunia, standing off to one side and scowling at the camera, and couldn't help grinning at the thought of how miserable she must have been. An older couple stood behind his mother, beaming first at the camera, and then his mother, and he realized that they must be his Evan's grandparents, who had died when he was little. How proud and happy they looked, he thought, and wished he could have known them. On the other side of his mother stood Snape, Lily's hand tucked in his arm. Harry was stunned at how good Snape looked, not the least bit the ugly, greasy git that his godfather had described. Sure, his features were too harsh to be termed beautiful, but there was something distinctive about that face. And when he looked at Lily, a fond look softened his features and made him almost approachable. Of course, a moment later, he glared out of the picture at Harry, scowling as if to say, "What are you staring at, Potter?" And Harry couldn't help sniggering. He glanced at the back of the picture and saw an inscription penned, "To my honorary brother, Severus, may you one day be as happy as I am today." Blinking back sudden tears, he passed the picture on to Hermione and found, to his surprise, that there was still something else in the box. It was quite obviously a manuscript. Charms through the centuries written across the front of it with "By Lily Evans Potter" written below. Carefully, he lifted the bound pages out and flipped through the manuscript, noting the occasional corrections and comments penned in red ink by Snape. He flipped to the back of the manuscript and found Snape had scrawled, "On the whole, a well-crafted piece of work, and one that will no doubt make your name famous throughout the Wizarding world. Congratulations, Lily." The tears that he'd been fighting wouldn't be held back anymore, and one splattered on the cover. He scrubbed his eyes with his sleeve, then carefully wiped the teardrop away before it could smear the ink, although he supposed that Snape had set a preserving spell on this as well. "Harry?" Hermione asked, a concerned tone in her voice. "Ever since I came to Hogwarts," Harry said, his voice strained with emotion, "I've always heard things about my dad. What a good Quidditch player he was, how well he did in his classes, all about being head boy. Sirius talks about him all the time, the things they did together, the jokes and the pranks they got up to. Even the headmaster tells me about him, but no one ever talks about my mother, except that she was head girl and loved my father and me. Aunt Petunia won't even say her name, and I don't even remember my Evans grandparents. I've always wanted... No, I've needed to know more about her than that she was pretty and smart, and now Snape..." He paused, dragging his sleeve over his eyes again. "I understand," Hermione said quietly, handing the picture back to him. Harry put it back in the box on top of the manuscript, then carefully set the letters on top. "I'm going up to my room now. If Ron and the others come back, would you let them know that I need a little private time?" Hermione nodded, and Harry climbed the stairs to the 7th-year dorm. He climbed into his bed, closing the curtains and setting a privacy spell around the bed. Carefully, he pulled out the picture and set it on the bed before him. Then he found the first letter, dated Christmas Holidays, 1971, and began getting to know his mother. Downstairs in the Gryffindor common room, Hermione contemplated the brand-new racing broom leaning against the wall where Harry had left it, and smiled.